Here, Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu tell it. Gaza is about to be transformed.
The whole deal, everything, getting solved. It's called peace in the Middle East.
It will bring back to Israel all our hostages and ensure that Gaza never again poses a threat to Israel.
What the U.S. president and Israeli prime minister have announced is the mutual acceptance of a 20-point peace plan, one that would do all the things Netanyahu just said it would do, but effectively contingent on one thing.
It is a complete surrender by Hamas. There's no other choice.
I think as a starting point, it's helpful to think of Trump's plan less as a peace offer and more of a peace ultimatum, because there are two main parts to this plan. One is effectively the complete surrender of Hamas, that after nearly 2 years locked in war, it voluntarily relinquish all of its leverage and power. But the second component of this peace plan is an explicit threat.
If Hamas rejects the deal, as you know, Bibi, you'd have our full backing to do what you would have to do.
If Hamas rejects your plan, Mr. President, then Israel will finish the job by itself.
Let's go through the plan. What I think very few people would dispute is that Trump's 20-point peace plan for Gaza is ambitious. It covers hostage and prisoner exchanges. It covers the delivery of aid. It covers governance, redevelopment, security guarantees, even at least one what-if scenario. But the first problem I see, which spiders out into maybe the plan's biggest problem, is on the question of perspective. The very first point of the plan, entirely subjective. Gaza will be a de-radicalized, terror-free zone that does not pose a threat to its neighbors. From absolutely any one perspective, this is completely uncontroversial. Nobody wants radical terror that poses a threat. But from two opposing perspectives, those of, say, Hamas and Israel, what's radical? Who poses the threat? Is it the militant group that carried out one of the deadliest attacks on Jewish people since the Holocaust? Or is it the army that has systematically crippled almost every aspect of life for a population of roughly 2 million? I'm not making a value judgment. I'm pointing out how this peace plan, from its very first words, is no fact-based roadmap. It's about applying pressure.
President Trump made clear that if Hamas does not accept, we will not do anything to stop the Israelis. Hamas cannot look for help from anyone else if they say no.
An important bit of context is that Hamas does not appear to have helped write this proposal. Reportedly, they weren't even consulted. And the plan was released as Israel's prime minister stated this for the public record.
I support your plan to end the war in Gaza, which achieves our war aims.
Which happens to set into motion peace point number 4. Within 72 hours of Israel publicly accepting this agreement, all hostages, alive and deceased, will be returned. This line reads more like an instruction than a peace proposal. It has been the central demand of the Israeli government since the war began, and it is among those things Hamas has steadfastly refused to do, because once Hamas runs out of hostages, it has very little left.
Once all of the hostages are gone, Hamas has no leverage, and we therefore will either have to accept disarmament or departing the Gaza Strip.
If Netanyahu's address marked the start of 72 hours on the clock, that sets a deadline for Hamas to release all Israeli hostages by October 2nd. Now, the most widely held account I've seen is that Hamas continues to hold 48 hostages, 20 of whom Israel believes are still alive. In exchange, only once all hostages are released, and who determines that is left unsaid, only then would Israel be compelled by this plan to release nearly 2,000 Gazans from Israeli custody, plus the remains of likely hundreds more.
They're not going to release the hostages until they get a deal they can live with. So the question is, can they live with this deal? And the answer is it's not clear.
But this is only really where the peace plan begins, because following the erasure of Hamas's leverage comes its complete surrender. This is probably as good a time as any to point out that as broad as this plan is, it is utterly lacking in crucial detail. Point 6. Once all hostages are returned, Hamas members who commit to peaceful coexistence. What does that mean, by the way? What does such a vow look like? Unclear. But it goes on. Members who commit to peaceful coexistence and to decommission their weapons will be given amnesty. Members of Hamas who wish to leave Gaza will be provided safe passage to receiving countries. And the surrender of Hamas is made complete a bit further down in the document. In point 13, Hamas and other factions agree to not have any role in the governance of Gaza, directly, indirectly, or in any form. All military, terror, and offensive infrastructure, including tunnels and weapon production facilities, will be destroyed and not rebuilt.
Decommission the military capabilities of Hamas and all other terror organizations. Do that immediately.
As with the question of releasing hostages, disarming for Hamas has long been a strategic impossibility because it leaves them so little maneuvering room. And I can explain by way of example. Early this year, a ceasefire between Hamas and Israel had finally taken hold. It was tenuous, but Phase 1, intended to last 6 weeks, was essentially a life and death trade.
33 hostages are to be freed. In exchange, Israel is to pull back its troops to a perimeter within Gaza's borders. It's agreed to let in 3 times more food and other aid. Hundreds of Palestinians are to be released from Israeli jails.
But after both sides began accusing the other of violating the agreement, aid not getting through, hostages being withheld, the ceasefire was broken before Phase 2, the withdrawal of Israeli troops, before it could even really begin. Israel effectively canceled the agreement in March, launching surprise airstrikes on Hamas targets, the hope for peace in Gaza lasting barely more than a couple of months.
It's certainly very common in the Middle East for countries to make agreements only to break them shortly afterwards. And that happens all the time. Israel is no exception.
I feel like I should repeat at this point, it's not my intention to spell out the rightness or wrongness of either side's position. It's really just to show how much daylight separates the two sides, as deeply entrenched as they are. And I think it's fair to say it was only just days before agreeing to Trump's peace plan, Benjamin Netanyahu seemed to agree with this fact.
They vow to repeat the atrocities of October 7th again and again and again, no matter how diminished their forces. That is why Israel must finish the job. That is why we want to do so as fast as possible.
There is a section of Trump's peace plan that has to do with who takes Hamas's place once it agrees to cede, effectively, all power. That's outlined in point number 9. Gaza will be governed under the temporary transitional governance of a technocratic, apolitical Palestinian committee responsible for delivering the day-to-day running of public services and municipalities for the people in Gaza. When the plan refers to a technocratic government, what they're really talking about is staffing positions of power based on a person's technical expertise rather than their politics. So maybe the Minister of Health is a doctor, or the Minister of Finance is an economist. So when the American authors of this plan talk about the transitional government being an apolitical Palestinian committee, that's what they mean. Except it goes on to say there will be oversight and supervision by a new international transitional body.
The Board of Peace, we call it, the Board of Peace, sort of a beautiful name, would be headed by a gentleman known as President Donald J. Trump of the United States.
One way to look at that is that this transitional government will not be apolitical at all.
It's very unclear in the 20-point plan who's going to be there other than President Trump and Tony Blair. Both of them have very collegial relationships with the Prime Minister of Israel. May be putting into effect circumstances that are deleterious to Palestinians.
There is one single mention of the Palestinian Authority assuming control. It could conceivably, eventually, run Gaza itself. Except for the strings attached, that it first has to have completed its reform program. Then there's a reference to President Trump's peace plan in 2020 being a key benchmark for that reform. But if you do like I did and dig into that 181-page peace plan from Trump's first term, you'll see a couple of key conditions for Palestinian Authority governance that Trump appears to want to reimpose in 2025. Things like that the PA should refrain from any attempt to join any international organization without the consent of the State of Israel, and should dismiss all pending actions against the State of Israel, the United States, and any of their citizens before the International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice, and all other tribunals, which today would be a direct reference to the allegation that Netanyahu is a war criminal and that Israel has committed genocide.
The need to reform and the need to hold an election, which they haven't held in 20 years, remains solid. But the way this is phrased in the agreement makes it extraordinarily difficult to include the Palestinian Authority inside this interim governance.
So even if the peace plan technically envisions some point in the future at which the Palestinian Authority could take control of Gaza, it's important to weigh that, I think, against how likely that is to happen.
There's no timeline in those 20 points. It says Israel will gradually, progressively, eventually. All of those words give a timeline that allows the prime minister to throw up hurdles because there's no timeline.
It won't come as a surprise to you that the vast majority of Israelis have no faith that the PA Leopard will change its spots.
You remember how earlier I mentioned how this peace plan is lacking crucial detail, which makes this more of a statement of intent than an actual plan? Well, one of the clearest expressions of that is in how it sees the question of security. It refers to a temporary international stabilization force made up of various international partners who would train vetted Palestinians to ultimately form the long-term internal security solution. Just so we're clear, this is meant to replace not just Hamas, but also the Israeli army.
All parties will agree on a timeline for Israeli forces to withdraw in phases. They'll be withdrawing in phases.
As we see in the plan's next point, Israel will not occupy or annex Gaza. But then the plan makes the withdrawal of the Israeli army contingent on the objective of a secure Gaza that no longer poses a threat to Israel, Egypt, or its citizens. An objective that doesn't even try to hide whose security it prioritizes. So while it concedes that practically the IDF will progressively hand over the Gaza territory it occupies to the ISF, that only goes ahead in alignment with the say-so of the Transitional Authority, which, remember, is overseen by a board chaired by Donald Trump. And even then, still allows for an Israeli army security perimeter presence that would remain until Gaza is properly secure, which is a point in time that at best can be described as undefined.
I mean, I expect Israel to be continuing the war effectively by other means and continuing to fight, even if the ceasefire goes ahead and even if there is an agreement. I would be shocked if both sides don't continue trading blows occasionally and trying to gain advantage through that.
There are about 1 million Palestinians from northern and central Gaza who fled to the south. They're going to start coming back. Will the Israeli military be there? Will there be Israeli roadblocks along the way? If so, that almost guarantees that the agreement won't work, because that almost guarantees that there will be skirmishes and confrontation.
So to recap, you have in this plan a commitment for Israeli troops to withdraw, except they may stay until the terror threat is properly put down, which happens no one knows how or by whose measure, and according to no timeline at all. All of this has historically been a non-starter for Hamas, a group which believes in its religious obligation to wage war until Israel leaves its land.
On the one hand, it's the best agreement that's probably available. On the other hand, there are so many ambiguities. And so I am not optimistic, not about the immediate implementation and certainly not about the smooth further implementation of the agreement.
Hamas now faces a difficult choice. It can reject this plan, which Israel has explicitly said it would see as giving it the green light for more war.
This can be done the easy way, or it can be done the hard way. But it will be done.
Hamas could also accept this plan, which may amount to erasing itself from existence.
Hamas might agree to this on the grounds that they've really kind of gotten fed up with Gaza. They hoped it would be a springboard to power in the national movement. They found instead that they became trapped there and they couldn't spread their influence further.
Or it could give the kind of answer that's more like, yes, but. There is enough detail missing here that allows for more negotiation, and then enough ambiguity that allows both sides to accuse the other of having failed in reaching for peace. But an important fact to remember in trying to gauge this plan's potential for success. By Netanyahu's own admission, the entire framework is consistent with all of his objectives for ending the war. And for Hamas, this plan is almost everything but.